Orphans find an abandoned ranch, but a forgotten cow changes everything. Julian Miller held his little brother's hand tightly as they walked down the dirt road for 3 days straight. The two boys had nowhere else to go after the last family that took them in decided they couldn't care for them anymore. That's when they spotted in the distance the ruins of what had once been a prosperous ranch. Julian stopped in the middle of the dusty road, observing the remains of the abandoned property. But what caught his attention most wasn't the wreckage of the house or the broken corral. It was the soft sound coming from behind the rotten wooden fence. "Jules, what's that over there?" asked Leo, pointing his dirty little finger toward the fence. Julian squinted, trying to see better. It was a cow. A black and white cow watching them with big, sad eyes, as if waiting for someone who would never return. "It's just a cow, Leo. Let's go." "But she's all alone, just like us," insisted the younger boy, pulling his brother's arm toward the animal. Julian sighed. They didn't have time to worry about abandoned animals. They needed to find a place to sleep before it got completely dark. But there was something in the way the cow looked at them that made him hesitate. "All right, let's take a closer look. But just for a minute." The two boys approached the wobbly fence. The cow didn't move, just kept watching them with those enormous eyes that seemed to hold all the sadness in the world. Julian noticed the animal was too thin, its ribs almost showing through its coat. "She's hungry, Jules," murmured Leo, stretching his little hand toward the cow. "Don't touch her, Leo. We don't know if she's mean." But the cow showed no aggression. On the contrary, when Leo brought his hand closer, she leaned in slightly, as if asking for affection. The little boy smiled for the first time in days. "Look, Jules, she likes us." Julian watched the scene with a heavy heart. It had been a long time since he'd seen his little brother smile like that. Ever since they left the last house, Leo had been very quiet, very scared. Seeing that smile on the boy's dirty face made him make an impulsive decision. "Let's go in and see if there's anything around here." "Go in where?" "Onto the property. Look, there's a hole in the fence over there. We can get through." Leo clapped his little hands, excited by the idea. Julian helped him through the hole in the wooden fence and then went through himself. The cow watched them with her gaze but didn't move from her spot near the fence. The old dusty ranch had been abandoned for a long time. The main house was partially destroyed, with the roof caved in and walls cracked, but there was a smaller building in the back that seemed to be in better shape. Julian decided to investigate. "Stay right here by the cow, Leo. Don't move." "Okay, Jules." The older boy walked toward the smaller building. It was a shed that had probably been used to store feed or tools. The door was ajar, and he pushed it slowly, making the sound of old wood creak. It was dark inside, but Julian could see there were some empty sacks on the floor and a pile of old hay in a corner. It wasn't much, but it would be better than sleeping out in the open for another night. "Leo, come here." The little boy came running, still smiling because of the cow. "We're going to sleep here tonight." "What about the little cow?" "The little cow will stay outside, where she always stays." "But what if she gets hungry?" Julian sighed. They barely had food for themselves. How were they going to feed a cow? But seeing the worried look on his little brother's face, he couldn't bring himself to be too harsh. "We'll figure that out tomorrow, okay?" "Okay." The two brothers settled into the old hay in the shed. Julian shared with Leo the last piece of bread he had saved in his torn backpack. It was very little, but at least they wouldn't go to sleep with completely empty stomachs. When night fell, Julian stayed listening to the sounds of the cow moving around outside. Every now and then she would moo softly, as if calling for someone. The sound was so sad, the boy felt an ache in his chest. "Jules," whispered Leo in the darkness. "What? Why is the little cow all alone?" "I don't know, Leo. Maybe her owner went away. Like our parents went away." Julian swallowed hard. Leo was very little when their parents died in the accident. He didn't remember them very well, but Julian remembered everything. His mother singing while she cooked, his father coming home from work and scooping them up, the life they had before everything fell apart. "Yeah, Leo, like our parents." "So she's an orphan like us?" "Yeah, I guess so." Then we could take care of her. Orphan takes care of orphan, right? Julian closed his eyes. How do you explain to an 8-year-old that they could barely take care of themselves? How to say they had no money, no home, no one in the world who cared about them? We'll think about it tomorrow, okay? Okay, Jules. Dear listener, if you are enjoying the story, please take a moment to leave a like, and especially to subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. The next day, Julian woke to the sound of voices outside. His heart raced. What if they were the owners of the ranch? What if they got kicked out of there too? He shook Leo gently to wake him and signaled for him to be quiet. The two of them approached the half-open door and peeked outside. There were 2 men talking near the fence where the cow was. One of them wore a leather hat and boots caked in mud. The other was younger, with a dress shirt already yellowed by the sun. So old man Silas didn't leave any relatives? Asked the man in the dress shirt. None, that's why the property is going to auction next week, replied the one with the hat. Too bad he didn't have time to sell the animals before... Well, before what happened? And that cow there? Forgotten. Silas had about 15 animals, but the folks who came to get the cattle didn't see her. She was hidden way back on the property. And now? Now she'll have to fend for herself, or someone takes her before the auction. Poor thing, she looks pretty skinny. Yeah, it's been about 2 months since the old man was here to take care of her. Julian felt his stomach turn to ice. 2 months? The cow had been alone for 2 months? How had she managed to survive so long? The men kept talking about documents and auction paperwork, but Julian stopped paying attention. His mind was racing, trying to process everything he had just discovered. The ranch owner had died, the property was going to auction, and the cow had been abandoned for months, waiting for someone who would never return. Jules, whispered Leo beside him, the little cow's been alone a long time. I know, Leo. We have to take care of her. Leo, we can't take care of a cow. We can't even take care of ourselves. But if nobody takes care of her, what will happen? Julian didn't know how to answer. He knew very well what happened to children nobody wanted. He'd already been through it many times, homes that took them in for a few months and then decided it was too much responsibility, families that promised love and care, but in the end always found an excuse to send them away. Was it different with animals? Would anyone care about a lonely, abandoned cow on a crumbling ranch? The men finally left, leaving the brothers alone again with the cow. Julian walked out of the shed slowly, still processing everything he had heard. Leo, we need to talk. About the little cow. About everything. Sit here. The 2 boys sat on the ground near the fence. The cow approached and stood watching them with those big, sad eyes. Leo, did you hear what the men said? That the little cow has been alone for a long time. Yeah, and that next week there's going to be an auction. Do you know what an auction is? Leo shook his head. It's when they sell the things of a person who died. They're going to sell this whole ranch. And the little cow? The little cow too. Leo made an expression of deep sadness, his little eyes filled with tears. But what if nobody buys her? Julian swallowed hard. That was exactly the question he didn't want to answer. I don't know, Leo. Julian, we have to save her. Leo, how are we going to save a cow? We don't have money, we don't have a house, we don't have anything. But she needs us. Look how skinny she is. Julian looked at the cow. She really was very thin. Her ribs showed beneath her coat and she moved slowly as if she had no strength. How had she managed to survive so long alone? All right, Julian said finally. We'll try to help her while we're here, but only until next week, okay? Okay, Leo smiled and ran closer to the cow. Hi, little cow. Now we're going to take care of you. The cow looked at the small boy, and for the first time, Julian had the impression she was less sad. For the rest of the morning, the brothers explored the surroundings of the ranch, looking for something that could serve as food for the cow. Julian found some tall grass that was still green in an area near a small stream. Leo, help me here. Let's pull up this grass for her. The 2 boys worked for hours pulling grass and carrying it near the fence. The cow watched everything attentively, as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing. When Julian threw the first handful of grass on the ground, the cow approached slowly and began to eat voraciously. It was obvious she was starving. "Look, Julian, she's eating!" Leo clapped his little hands, excited. Yeah, she was really very hungry. They spent the rest of the day collecting grass and watching the cow eat. Julian noticed she seemed a little more lively after the meal. She even mooed less sadly. When night fell, the brothers settled again in the shed. But this time Julian couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the cow out there, alone in the darkness. He kept imagining how she had spent all those nights over the last 2 months, waiting for someone who never came back. It was a feeling he knew well, the feeling of waiting, of believing someone would return, of having hope and then seeing that hope destroyed, little by little. "Julian," whispered Leo. "What? Do you think she dreams?" "Who?" "The little cow. Do you think she dreams about her owner?" Julian felt a tightness in his chest. How could an 8-year-old ask such deep questions? "I don't know, Leo, maybe. I dream about Mom and Dad sometimes." "Yeah?" "Yeah. They're always calling me to go with them, but I say I can't because I have to take care of you." Julian swallowed hard, trying not to cry. Leo was so small and already carried so much responsibility, always worried about not abandoning his older brother, even in his dreams. "Leo, you don't have to take care of me, I take care of you." "I know, but we take care of each other, right? Like family." "Yeah, like family." "So now the little cow is our family too." Julian was silent for a long time. How could he explain to a child that they couldn't get attached, that next week they would have to leave and leave the cow behind, that this was the reality of their life, always having to leave everything behind? "We'll see, Leo, we'll see." The next day, Julian woke to a strange noise outside. It was a sound he had never heard before, a low, continuous moan that seemed to come from the cow. He ran out of the shed and saw the cow lying on the ground, breathing with difficulty. Her eyes were glassy and she could barely lift her head. "Leo, Leo, wake up! Something's wrong with the cow." The little boy came out of the shed, his eyes still swollen with sleep. But when he saw the cow on the ground, he became completely awake. "What happened to her, Julian?" "I don't know, she's really sick." Julian slowly approached the cow. She was panting and her muzzle was too hot. Even without knowing anything about animals, he could tell something was very wrong. "We need to call someone to help her," said Leo, his eyes full of tears. "Who are we going to call, Leo? We don't know anyone here." "But she's going to die." "She's not going to die," said Julian, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "I'll think of something." He watched the cow for a few minutes, trying to figure out what to do. Then he remembered something he had seen in one of the houses they had lived in. The lady of the house always put wet cloths on people's foreheads when they had a fever. "Leo, help me here. Let's wet that old shirt that was in the shed and put it on her head." "But how are we going to wet it?" Julian pointed to the nearby creek. "There's water there." The two boys ran to the creek with the old torn shirt Julian had found in the shed. They soaked it well and ran back to the cow. Julian placed the wet cloth over the animal's head. The cow didn't react much, but Julian had the impression she sighed in relief. "Now what do we do?" asked Leo. "Now we stay here with her so she won't be alone." The two boys sat down beside the cow and took turns wetting the cloth in the creek and keeping her head cool. They spent the whole day there, not even leaving to look for food for themselves. Julian noticed Leo was growing quieter and more worried. The little boy stroked the cow's neck and whispered words of comfort, as if talking to a baby. "She's going to be okay, right, Julian?" "I hope so, Leo. She can't leave like our parents did. We promised we'd take care of her." Julian felt a terrible pain in his chest. Leo had grown so attached to that cow that Julian was afraid to imagine what would happen if she didn't get better. During the afternoon, the cow seemed to get a little better. She managed to lift her head and even drank some water that Julian brought in an old can he found in the shed. "Look, Julian, she drank water. That's good, right?" "Yes, Leo, that's very good." When night fell, the cow was breathing better, but still hadn't managed to get up. Julian decided they would sleep right there outside next to her. "Leo, let's get the hay from the shed to make a bed out here." Are we going to sleep with the cow? Yes. So she won't be alone if she gets worse during the night. Leo smiled for the first time all day. They made an improvised bed with the old hay beside the cow and lay down there, looking at the stars. Julian? Thank you for not leaving. What do you mean? When the cow got sick, you could have said it wasn't our problem, that we had to leave. But you stayed. Julian felt his eyes well up. He had really thought about that. He had thought about taking Leo by the hand and continuing to walk. It would have been easier, simpler, safer. But when he saw the desperation on his little brother's face, when he saw how Leo genuinely cared about that abandoned cow, he didn't have the heart to leave. We take care of each other, remember? And now she's part of our family too. Leo smiled and snuggled closer to his brother. The cow let out a long sigh and finally seemed to relax. They slept like that, the three orphans together under the starry sky, taking care of each other the only way they knew how. On the third day, Julian woke with a strange feeling. There was a different silence in the air. He opened his eyes slowly and saw that the cow was no longer lying down. She was standing watching the two boys sleep, with an almost maternal expression in her large, dark eyes. "Leo," whispered Julian, shaking his brother gently. "Look." Leo opened his eyes, and when he saw the cow standing, his face lit up with the biggest smile Julian had ever seen. "She's better. Jules, she's better." The cow approached the boys and nudged her muzzle against Leo's head, as if thanking him for the care. "Hi, little cow," said Leo, stroking the animal's neck. "I'm so glad you're better." Julian smiled, seeing his brother's joy. It had been so long since he'd seen Leo truly happy. But his happiness was short-lived when he remembered what the men had said. The auction was in 2 days. "Leo, we need to talk." "About what?" "About the auction. Remember the men said it would be next week." Leo's smile vanished. "Is it tomorrow?" "It's the day after tomorrow, but we'll have to leave before that." "Why?" "Because when they come for the auction, they'll see us here, and then they'll call the people responsible for abandoned children." Leo fell silent, processing his brother's words. "And then they'll separate us?" "It's possible. And the little cow?" "The little cow. Someone will buy her." "And if nobody buys her?" Julian didn't answer. He couldn't. Leo began to cry softly. "I don't want to leave her alone again, Jules." "I don't either, Leo. But there's nothing we can do." "Yes, there is," shouted Leo, standing up suddenly. "We can take her with us." "Leo, how are we going to travel with a cow?" "We'll figure out a way." "There is no way, Leo. A cow isn't a little puppy you can put in a backpack. She's big. She needs special food. She needs a place to stay. Then we stay here." "We can't stay here. This place isn't ours." Leo threw himself on the ground and began to cry for real. The cow approached him and nudged her muzzle against the boy, as if trying to console him. Julian felt lost. How do you explain to an 8-year-old that the world was cruel, that no matter how much you cared about someone, sometimes you had to leave that person behind? He knelt beside his brother and hugged him. "Leo, listen. We'll stay here one more day. Tomorrow we'll leave early in the morning before anyone comes for the auction. Okay?" "It's not okay," sobbed Leo. "Nothing is okay." Julian didn't know what to say. Leo was right. Nothing was okay. Nothing had been okay for a long time. They spent the day caring for the cow, who was visibly better. She even managed to eat some of the grass they brought. But there was a sadness in the air, as if everyone knew it would all be over soon. In the afternoon, while Leo took a nap leaning against the cow, Julian decided to explore the old dusty ranch better. Maybe he'd find something useful for the journey they would have to make the next day. He went to the wreckage of the main house and began to rummage through the rubble. Most things were broken or ruined by the rain, but he found a small pot that was still usable and an old blanket that might be useful. It was when he was leaving the house that he saw something that caught his attention. Near what had been the porch, there was a pile of letters yellowed with time. Some were wet and illegible, but others could still be read. Julian picked one up and tried to decipher the shaky handwriting. It was a bill from some company. He picked up another. It was from a bank talking about overdue loans, but the third letter was different. It was from a woman named Martha Miller, from a small town about 200 kilometers away. "Dear Silas," the letter said, "it's been a long time since we've heard from you. Mom always asks about you when I visit her at the nursing home. She says you were the best worker she ever had and that she misses you very much. If you ever want to visit us, our door is always open. With affection, Martha." Julian read the letter twice. Silas had worked for this woman's mother, and her mother was in a nursing home. He put the letter in the pocket of his torn pants and went back to where Leo and the cow were. But he said nothing about what he had found. He still didn't know if that information would be of any use. That night the three slept together again. Julian lay awake for hours watching the stars and thinking about the letter he had found. There was a strange feeling in his chest, as if that letter were important somehow. Early in the morning, Julian woke up determined. He was going to write a letter to this Martha Miller. "Leo, wake up." "Is it time to go already?" asked the little boy, his eyes sad. "Not yet. I need to do something first." Julian went to the shed and got a piece of cardboard he had found inside. He didn't have a pen, but he found a piece of charcoal among the ashes of an old campfire. He sat on the ground and began to write with the charcoal. "Mrs. Martha, my name is Julian Miller, name. My brother Leo and I found your letter at old man Silas's house. He's not here anymore, but he left a very beautiful cow who is all alone. We've been taking care of her for a few days, but we can't stay. If you know of anyone who can take care of her, our cow needs a family. She is very affectionate and good. Thank you, Julian." He reread the message several times. It wasn't perfect, but it was the best he could do. "What are you doing, Julian?" asked Leo, coming closer. "I'm writing a letter to someone who knew the cow's owner." "What for?" "To see if she can help the cow find a new home." Leo was silent for a moment. "Do you think she'll write back?" "I don't know, Leo, but at least we tried." Julian knew the chances were slim. How would that woman receive the letter? How would she know where to find them? How could she help? But he had to try. For Leo. For himself. And especially for the cow who had trusted them. "Leo, we're going to town to mail this letter. Then we'll come back to say goodbye to the cow before the auction." "Okay, Julian." The two brothers walked to the nearest small town, which was about 5 kilometers from the old dusty ranch. It was a small town, with just a few streets and a tiny post office that operated inside a bakery. Julian handed the letter to the postal worker, an elderly man who looked strangely at the two dirty, ragged boys. "Do you have money for the stamp?" asked the man. Julian felt his heart sink. They had no money, they had nothing. "We don't, sir, but it's very important. It's about an abandoned animal that needs help." The man looked at the boys for a long time. Then he sighed and shook his head. "All right. This time I'll pay for the stamp. But don't make a habit of it." "Thank you, sir. Thank you so much," said Julian, his eyes shining. The brothers ran back to the ranch, eager to tell the cow they had tried to help her. But when they got near the property, they saw cars parked in front and people walking around the grounds. "Julian, wasn't the auction only tomorrow?" whispered Leo. "It was, but it looks like they came early to look at things." They hid behind some trees and watched. There were about 5 or 6 adults walking around the property, pointing at the buildings and taking notes. "What about our cow?" asked Leo, worried. Julian craned his neck, trying to see. The cow was in the same place as always, near the fence, but now there were 2 people near her watching. "She's too skinny," said one of the men. "Won't be worth much." "That's true," agreed the other, "but the meat is still good for something." Julian felt his blood run cold. They weren't talking about buying the cow to take care of her. They were talking about something he didn't even want to think about. "Leo, don't listen to what they're saying." "Are they going to hurt the little cow?" "No, they won't," lied Julian, trying to protect his little brother from the cruel reality. But Leo wasn't foolish. He understood perfectly what those men meant, and he began to cry softly. "We have to save her, Julian." "How, Leo? We're just kids. We have no money, we have nothing." "But we can't let them hurt her." Julian felt completely lost. What could two orphaned children do against a group of adults with money? How could they save a cow when they could barely save themselves? Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. The boys stayed hidden until the people left. When they could finally approach the cow, she seemed sadder than ever, as if she knew something bad was going to happen. "Hi, little cow," said Leo, hugging the animal's neck. "We won't let anyone hurt you." Julian didn't have the heart to contradict his brother, even knowing it was an impossible promise to keep. They spent the night beside the cow, each lost in their own thoughts. Julian thought about the letter he had sent. Would it reach its destination? Would the woman care? Would there be time for anything to work out? Leo thought about how it would be if they could really keep the cow. He imagined the three of them living together somewhere, like a real family. He knew it was an impossible dream, but he couldn't stop dreaming. The cow seemed to feel the boys' sadness. Every now and then she would nuzzle one of them, as if trying to give comfort. The next day, Julian woke to the sound of engines. There were even more cars on the property. The auction was beginning. "Leo, we have to get out of here." "I don't want to go, Julian. We don't have a choice. If they find out we were living here, they'll call the child welfare agency." "So what?" "So what? They'll separate us. You'll go to one family and I'll go to another." Leo fell silent, taking in his brother's words. Then he got up slowly and hugged the cow one last time. "Goodbye, little cow. We'll never forget you." The cow seemed to understand it was a farewell. She rested her head against the boys and let out a low, sad moo. Julian picked up the torn backpack and took Leo's hand. They started walking toward the road, but with every step they took, it was as if a part of them stayed behind. When they reached the road, Leo stopped and turned for one last look. "Julian, look." Julian turned and saw that the cow had gone to the fence and was watching them leave. She was mooing softly, as if calling them back. "She doesn't want us to go," whispered Leo. "I know, Leo. I don't want to either." They stood on the road for a few minutes, looking at the cow watching them from the fence. It was one of the saddest scenes Julian had ever witnessed. "Come on, Leo. We need to go." But before they could take their first step, they heard the sound of a car approaching. Julian pulled Leo to the side of the road, hoping the car would pass right by. But the car stopped right next to them. It was an old, beat-up car, driven by a woman with graying hair and kind eyes. "Excuse me," said the woman, rolling down the window. "Are you the boys who wrote the letter?" Julian was speechless. "Are you Mrs. Martha?" "Yes, I am. I received your letter yesterday. I came as soon as I could." "How did you know it was us?" "Well, it wasn't hard. 2 boys on the road near Old Man Silas's ranch." She smiled. "You're not exactly subtle." Julian didn't know what to say. He had sent that letter more out of desperation than any real hope that something would happen. "Did you come because of the cow?" "I came because of the cow and because of you." "Because of us?" "Yes. Get in the car. Let's talk better." Julian hesitated. All his experiences with adults who promised help had ended badly. "Don't worry," said Mrs. Martha, as if reading his thoughts. "I won't hurt you. We just want to talk." Leo tugged on his brother's shirt sleeve. "Jules, she seems nice." Julian looked into the woman's eyes. There was something in them that calmed him a little, a kindness that seemed genuine. "Okay," he finally said. The 2 boys got into Mrs. Martha's old car. She drove to the entrance of the ranch and parked near the auction cars. "Now tell me the whole story," she said, turning to look at the boys in the back seat. Julian told everything: how they had found the abandoned ranch, how they discovered the cow, how they cared for her when she got sick, how they found out about the auction. Mrs. Martha listened to everything in silence, only asking a few questions now and then. When Julian finished, she was thoughtful for a few minutes. "And where do you live?" "We don't have a home," replied Leo. "We move from place to place." "And family, parents, relatives?" "There's no one," said Julian. "Just the 2 of us." Mrs. Martha sighed deeply. "I see." She got out of the car and asked the boys to wait. She went to where the auction was happening and talked to some people. Julian and Leo could see through the window, but couldn't hear what was being said. After about 20 minutes, Mrs. Martha returned to the car with a smile on her face. "I did it." "Did what?" asked Julian. "I bought the cow." Leo shouted with joy and clapped his hands. Julian was speechless. "But how? Why?" "Because you two reminded me of something very important. Silas always said that animals aren't our property. They are our responsibility. And now, what will happen to her? Now she'll come with me to my estate. There she'll have other animals for company, green pasture, clean water." "That's great," said Leo, beaming with happiness. But Julian was still suspicious. "What about us?" "Oh yes, about you," said Mrs. Martha with a serious expression. "I have a proposal." Julian tensed up. Here came the conditions. There were always conditions. "Would you like to come with me, to take care of her?" "What do you mean?" "My estate is big, there's a lot of work. I could use the help of 2 clever boys like you. In return, you'd have a house, food, school, and the little cow. The little cow would be your responsibility. Every day you'd have to take care of her, feed her, brush her, clean the stall." Julian couldn't believe what he was hearing. It was too good to be true. "Why would you do this for us?" Mrs. Martha smiled sadly. "Because I was an orphan too. I know what it's like to have no one in the world, and because Silas always said that when you help someone, you're really helping yourself too. But what if we do something wrong? If we're too much trouble? You won't give up on us?" Julian's question broke Mrs. Martha's heart. How many times had that boy been abandoned to be so afraid to trust? "Julian, I won't lie to you. There will be hard days. You'll get into mischief. I'll get angry. You'll be upset with me. But a real family doesn't give up. A real family sticks together through the good times and the bad." "And what if we're not a good family?" asked Leo with worried little eyes. "Oh, my boy," said Mrs. Martha, stroking Leo's face. "Family isn't something you are. It's something you learn to be, and we learn together." Julian felt his eyes well up. For the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to have hope. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure it's worth trying. And you?" Julian looked at Leo, who was grinning from ear to ear. Then he looked out the window and saw the cow still near the fence, watching everything. "We accept," he finally said. "Wonderful. Then let's get our cow and go home." The next few minutes were a whirlwind of emotions. Mrs. Martha had a trailer hitched to her car, specifically for transporting the cow. Julian and Leo helped lead her into the trailer, and for the first time since they'd found her, the cow seemed calm. "She knows everything will be okay," said Leo, stroking the animal's neck. "I think so too," agreed Julian. During the drive to Mrs. Martha's farm, the boys were quiet, still processing everything that had happened. It was hard to believe that in a matter of days, their lives had completely changed. "Mrs. Martha," said Julian after an hour on the road, "do you have other children?" "I did. A boy named Timothy. But he's no longer with us." Julian understood immediately. "We're so sorry." "Thank you. It was 5 years ago. Since then, the farm has been far too quiet." Leo, who was almost asleep against the window, murmured, "It won't be quiet anymore." Mrs. Martha smiled. "That's true. Now it won't be." When they arrived at the farm, the boys were impressed. It was a beautiful place with a large, cozy house, surrounded by green pasture and several trees. There were other animals grazing in the field, horses, a few cows, goats, and chickens. "Our little cow is going to like it here," said Leo, looking at everything with shining eyes. "Let's put her in the pasture with the other cows," said Mrs. Martha. "But first, how about a bath and some real food for you two?" Julian and Leo looked at each other. It had been a long time since they'd had a hot bath or a full meal. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure. This is your home now." The first weeks at the farm were like a dream for the boys. They had their own rooms, clean clothes, 3 meals a day, and most importantly, they had their cow. The cow, which they decided to name Faith, adapted quickly to life on the farm. She befriended the other cows, and in no time was fat and healthy again. Julian and Leo woke up early every day to take care of her. They fed her, cleaned the stall, brushed her coat, and spent hours simply talking to her. Mrs. Martha watched everything from a distance, with a smile on her face. It was evident how those three had saved each other. "How is she?" asked Mrs. Martha one day, approaching the stable where the boys were tending to Faith. "She's great," replied Leo, beaming. "Look how she's filled out." "And she seems really happy," added Julian. "Just like you two," said Mrs. Martha, smiling. Julian blushed. It was true. He couldn't remember being this happy since before his parents died. "Mrs. Martha, can we ask you something?" "Of course." "Why did you help us?" "Really?" Mrs. Martha leaned against the fence and watched Faith for a few seconds before answering. "You know I said I was an orphan too?" The boys nodded. "When I was your age, I also went from home to home, hoping someone would truly want me. And when I finally found a family, I learned a very important lesson." "What lesson?" "That love isn't something that runs out. The more you give, the more you have." Julian was thoughtful. "What do you mean?" "When I took care of Timothy, my son, I discovered I had a lot of love inside me. When he was gone, I thought that love was no longer of any use. But you showed me I was wrong." "Us?" "You showed me that there's still a lot of love in me to give, and that there's still a lot of life to live." Leo approached Mrs. Martha and hugged her. "We love you too, Mum." "I know, my boy, I know." The months passed and life at the Green Valley estate became a wonderful routine. The boys started attending school in the nearby town, made friends, learned about agriculture and animal care. Faith became one of the most beloved cows on the estate. She had developed a unique personality. She was affectionate, intelligent, and seemed to understand everything happening around her. Julian discovered he had a natural talent for handling animals. Mrs. Martha always said he had the same gift that old man Silas had, the ability to understand what the animals needed without them having to speak. Leo proved to be an excellent student and began helping Mrs. Martha with the estate's bookkeeping. He had an incredible ease with numbers and loved organizing the milk production and sales records, but not everything was easy. There were moments of tension, arguments, days when the boys tested the limits of Mrs. Martha's patience. There was the time Julian decided he wanted to leave because he thought Mrs. Martha had liked a school project of Leo's more. He packed his backpack and walked out the door, determined to return to the road. Mrs. Martha followed him, but didn't try to stop him. She simply walked beside him in silence. After 2 hours of walking, Julian stopped. "Why don't you try to convince me to come back?" "Because that's not how it works. If you want to leave, you'll leave. But if you want to stay, that will also be your choice." "And if I leave and never come back? Then you'll miss the chance to discover how good it feels to be truly loved." Julian was silent for a long time. Then, without a word, he turned around and went back to the estate. There was also the time when Leo got sick and had to stay in the hospital for a week. Julian panicked, thinking he would lose his brother like he had lost his parents. Mrs. Martha spent every night at the hospital with the boys, sleeping in an uncomfortable chair, keeping them company and bringing home-cooked food. "You don't have to stay here," Julian said one night. "We're not your problem." "You are not my problem," replied Mrs. Martha, adjusting Leo's blanket. "You are my responsibility, and I chose this responsibility." It was that night that Julian truly understood what it meant to have a family. Dear listener, if you are enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing, the major turning point in the boys' lives happened almost a year after they arrived at the estate. It was a Saturday morning, and they were in the stable taking care of Faith when they heard the sound of cars arriving. Julian peeked through the window and saw 2 official cars parking in front of the house. His heart raced. They were government cars. "Leo, stay here with Faith," he whispered. "What's happening?" "I don't know, but stay here." Julian left the stable and hid behind the house, from where he could hear the conversation on the porch. "Mrs. Martha Miller," said a male voice. "That's me. I'm Dr. Victor Vance, from the Child Welfare Agency. This is Mrs. Lydia Brooks, from the District Attorney's Office. May we speak?" Julian felt his legs go weak. They had come to take him and Leo. After almost a year, someone had discovered that 2 children were living on the estate without official documentation. "Of course. Come in." The adults entered the house and Julian ran back to the stable. "Leo, we have to leave. Now." "Why?" "People from the government came. They're going to try to separate us." Leo started to cry. "But I don't want to leave. I like it here." "I like it too, Leo. But we don't have a choice." They began to pack their few things, but Julian noticed Leo wouldn't leave Faith's side. "Leo, let's go." "What about her? Are we going to leave her alone again?" Julian looked at the cow, who watched them with those big, intelligent eyes. It seemed like she knew something was wrong. "Faith will be okay. She has Mrs. Martha. But she's our responsibility. We promised we'd never abandon her." Julian felt torn in two. Leo was right. They had promised. But how could they keep an impossible promise? "Leo, sometimes we have to break promises to protect the ones we love." "No," shouted Leo. "I'm not leaving without her." That's when they heard footsteps approaching the stable. Julian pulled Leo, and the two hid behind a pile of hay. "Boys," it was Mrs. Martha's voice. "I know you're in there. Come here." Julian took a deep breath and came out of hiding, pulling Leo by the hand. "Mrs. Martha, we can explain." "No need to explain anything," she said, smiling. "You're not going anywhere." "But the people from the government?" "The people from the government came with good news." Julian and Leo looked at each other, confused. "What good news?" "Come with me. You'll see." The boys followed Mrs. Martha to the house, still wary. In the living room were the two government workers, with papers spread out on the coffee table. "Boys," said Mrs. Martha, "I want you to meet Dr. Victor and Mrs. Lydia. They came here to finalize the adoption paperwork." Julian was speechless. "Adoption?" "Yes. I filed the petition 6 months ago. Today they brought the final papers." "You mean?" "I mean you are now officially my sons. Forever." Leo started crying tears of joy and ran to hug Mrs. Martha. Julian stood still processing the information. "Forever?" he whispered. "Forever," confirmed Mrs. Martha. "Through good times and bad, through fights and reconciliations, in sickness and in health. Forever." Julian finally let the tears he had held back for so long stream down his face. He also ran to hug Mrs. Martha, who was now officially his mother. "Thank you," he murmured. "Thank you for not giving up on us." "Thank you for teaching me to love again," she replied, kissing both boys' foreheads. Dr. Victor and Mrs. Lydia watched the scene, moved. It was rare to see an adoption story so full of genuine love. "Mrs. Martha," said Dr. Victor, "there's just one final formality. The boys need to sign some documents." "Of course." Julian and Leo signed the papers with trembling hands. It was hard to believe they finally had a real family. "There," said Mrs. Lydia. "Now it's official. Julian Miller Harrison and Leo Miller Harrison, welcome to the Harrison family." "Harrison?" asked Leo. "That's my last name," explained Mrs. Martha. "Martha Harrison. Now you are Harrisons too." The government workers left after congratulating the new family. When they were alone, Mrs. Martha, now officially Mom, took the boys back to the stable. "Now what?" asked Julian. "Now you're going to tell Faith the good news." Leo smiled and ran to hug the cow. "Faith, we're never leaving again. Now Mrs. Martha is our real mom." The cow seemed to understand the boy's joy. She nuzzled him and let out a soft moo, as if she was celebrating too. Julian watched the scene with a full heart. There was everything he had ever wished for: a brother, a mother, a home, and even the cow that had started this whole journey. "Mom," he said, trying out the new word, "can I ask you something?" "Of course, my son." "Why did you choose the last name Harrison for us?" Mrs. Martha smiled. "Harrison means holy people, people who were chosen for something special. And you were chosen to bring joy back into my life." "And is Faith a Harrison too?" asked Leo. "Of course, she is part of the family too." From that day on, life at the Green Valley estate got even better. Julian and Leo dedicated themselves even more to their studies and work on the property. Faith became one of the most productive cows on the estate, giving rich, creamy milk that Mrs. Martha sold in town. But the biggest change was emotional. The boys finally allowed themselves to dream about the future. Julian started talking about studying veterinary medicine to become an animal doctor, like the one who had taken care of Faith when she was sick. Leo showed interest in farm management and talked about expanding the estate when he grew up. "We could have a huge estate," he would say, lying in the pasture next to Faith, "with hundreds of cows, horses, pigs, chickens. And Faith would be the general supervisor," Julian would add, laughing. The cow seemed to like these grand plans. She listened to everything attentively, as if taking mental notes. 2 years after the official adoption, something happened that threw the whole family into a panic. Faith, who was now about 5 years old, began to show strange behavior. She grew restless, kept away from the other cows, and sometimes mooed differently, louder and more insistent. "Mom, there's something wrong with Faith," said Julian, worried. "I'll call the vet," replied Mrs. Martha. Dr. Hayes, the local veterinarian, arrived the next day to examine the cow. He ran several tests and observed her behavior for a few hours. "Well," he finally said with a smile on his face, "I have a surprise for you." "Is she sick?" asked Leo, his eyes full of tears. "On the contrary, she is perfectly healthy. And pregnant." "Pregnant?" exclaimed Julian and Leo at the same time. "Pregnant. In about 6 months you'll have a calf running around the estate." The joy was universal. Leo danced around the stable, Julian hugged Faith, and Mrs. Martha couldn't stop smiling. "A little baby," shouted Leo. "Faith is going to have a little baby." During the following months, the whole family prepared for the calf's arrival. Julian read every book on cow birthing he could find. Leo prepared a special space in the stable, with clean hay and fresh water. Mrs. Martha ordered a special veterinary kit for emergencies, and Dr. Hayes made regular visits to monitor the pregnancy. Faith seemed to know she was the center of attention. She accepted all the care with patience and affection, as if she understood everyone was concerned for her and her baby. "Faith," Leo would say, stroking the cow's round belly, "your baby is going to have the best family in the world. It will have 2 brothers, a grandmother, and a mommy who will love it forever." Julian watched these conversations with emotion. Leo had become a confident and happy boy, very different from the frightened child he had protected for so long on the road. "Julian," Leo said one day, "do you remember when we found Faith?" "I remember. How could I forget? Do you remember she was alone and abandoned just like us?" "I remember. And now look, she has a family, she's expecting a baby, she's fat and happy. It's true. You know what I think?" "What?" "I think we saved her, but she saved us too." Julian smiled. Leo was right. If it weren't for Faith, they never would have written that letter. They never would have met Mrs. Martha. They never would have found a real family. "Yeah, Leo, I think you're both right." The birth happened on a rainy winter night. Julian woke to the sound of Faith bellowing in a way he had never heard before. He knew immediately the time had come. "Leo, Mom! The baby's coming!" The whole family ran to the barn. Dr. Hayes was already on his way, but the baby didn't want to wait. Within an hour, a small, wet calf was in the world. "It's a little boy," announced Julian, who had read about how to identify a calf's sex. "And he's perfect," added Leo, watching the little one try to stand. Faith licked her baby affectionately, letting out low, loving bellows. It was obvious she was happy and proud. "What shall we call him?" asked Mrs. Martha. Julian and Leo looked at each other. They had discussed it hundreds of times during the months of waiting. "Wonder," they both said at the same time. "Wonder?" asked Mrs. Martha. "Yes," explained Julian. "Because it was a wonder we found Faith. It was a wonder she survived all alone. It was a wonder we found our mother. And now it's a wonder she has a baby." "And because our whole family is a wonder," finished Leo. Mrs. Martha felt her eyes well up. Her boys had become wise and loving young men. "Wonder is a perfect name," she said. The years passed and the Harrison farm became one of the most prosperous in the region. Julian graduated as a veterinarian with top marks in his class and returned to work on the family property. Leo specialized in farm management and turned the farm into a highly efficient and sustainable business. Faith had 3 more calves over the years: Joy, Little Faith, and Brave. The whole cow family lived happily in the farm's lush pasture. Wonder grew up strong and handsome, becoming a gentle bull who helped Julian with the other cows. He had inherited his mother's intelligence and gentle temperament. Mrs. Martha, now past 70, watched her sons and grandchildren, as she called the calves, with immense satisfaction. Her house, which had been silent and sad for so long, was now full of laughter, conversation, and life. "Mom," said Julian one day, at 25, "I have a surprise for you." "What surprise?" "Nora has agreed to marry me." Nora was the local schoolteacher, a sweet and intelligent young woman who had won Julian's heart years before. "How wonderful!" exclaimed Mrs. Martha, hugging her son. "When will the wedding be?" "Next year. And we wanted to have the ceremony here at the farm in the pasture where it all began." "Of course, it will be beautiful." Leo, now 20, had also found love. He was dating Jade, the daughter of the owner of the local farmers' cooperative. "Rafa," he said one day, "do you remember when we were little and thought we'd never have a real family?" "I do. And now look, you're getting married, I'll be married in a few years, Mom will have daughters-in-law and grandchildren. And it all started with an abandoned cow." "Yeah, who would have thought Faith would change our lives like this?" The 2 brothers walked to the pasture where Faith was with her children. She was older now, with a few white hairs mixed into her black coat, but she was still a beautiful and majestic cow. When she saw the boys approaching, she walked toward the fence as she had done for years. "Hi, Faith," said Leo, stroking her neck. "We came to tell you some news." The cow watched them with those intelligent eyes that seemed to understand everything. "Rafa is getting married," Leo continued, "and soon our family will be even bigger. And you'll be Grandma Faith to our children," added Julian, smiling. The cow seemed to like the idea. She pressed her muzzle against the 2 boys and let out a soft moo. "Thank you, Faith," whispered Julian. "Thank you for saving our family." The cow looked him directly in the eyes, and Julian was certain she understood exactly what he had said. On the day of Julian's wedding, the Green Valley estate was filled with guests. Relatives, friends, neighbors, all came to celebrate the happiness of the Harrison family. The ceremony took place in the same pasture where Julian and Leo had found Faith years before. A simple altar was set up near the fence where it had all begun. During the ceremony, Julian looked at the guests and saw the entire story of his life pass before his eyes. Mrs. Martha, beautiful in her blue dress, with tears of joy streaming down her face. Leo, elegant in his suit, holding the rings with pride. And there in the back of the pasture, watching everything with curiosity, was Faith with her children. "Julian," said the priest, "do you take Nora to be your wife, to love and cherish her in joy and in sorrow, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" "I do," replied Julian, looking into the bride's eyes with all the love in the world. "Nora, do you take Julian to be your husband, to love and cherish him in joy and in sorrow, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" "I do," replied Nora, radiant with happiness. "Then, by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." The Green Valley estate erupted in applause and shouts of joy. Julian kissed Nora as flower petals rained down on them. Leo approached the newlyweds and hugged them, moved. "Welcome to the family, sis," he said to Nora. "Thank you for having me," she replied, also moved. Mrs. Martha approached and hugged all 3 young people at once. "My family grew a little more today," she said, smiling through her tears. During the party, Julian slipped away for a few minutes and went to the fence where Faith was. "Faith," he said, "today is a very special day. I married the woman I love, my family is happy, and all of this happened because you came into our life." The cow approached the fence, and Julian could stroke her head. "Thank you for waiting for us that day. Thank you for giving us a reason to write that letter. Thank you for teaching us that family isn't just blood. It's choice. It's love. It's care." Faith pressed her muzzle against Julian's hand, as if blessing the marriage. 2 years later, Julian and Nora had their first daughter. a beautiful girl with big eyes and curly hair, whom they decided to name Daisy. When Daisy was old enough to walk, her favorite place on the Green Valley estate was the cow pasture. She would spend hours talking to Faith, who had become a loving and patient grandma. "Grandma Faith," the 3-year-old girl would say, "tell the story of when you found Daddy and Uncle Leo." The cow would listen attentively and answer with soft moos, as if she were really telling the story. Julian watched these conversations with emotion. His daughter was growing up in an environment of love and security, something he had never imagined possible when he was a child. Leo also married Jade, and 2 years later they had twins, Timothy and Ivy. The Green Valley estate filled with the laughter of children, something that made Mrs. Martha feel like the happiest person in the world. "Mum," Julian said one day as they watched the children playing in the yard, "do you regret adopting 2 orphaned, troubled boys?" "Troubled?" laughed Mrs. Martha. "You were never troubled. You were just children who needed love. And now? And now you are wonderful men, dedicated fathers, caring sons. You are my greatest pride. Thank you for not giving up on us. Thank you for teaching me that it's never too late to rebuild a family." Faith lived many years at the Harrisons' Green Valley estate. She saw 4 generations of calves be born and grow up. She saw Julian and Leo graduate, get married, and have children. When her time to depart finally came, she was surrounded by the entire family she had helped to build. Julian, now a respected veterinarian, Leo, a prosperous farm manager, Mrs. Martha, a beloved grandmother, and all the grandchildren she had watched grow up. "Thank you, Faith," whispered Julian, stroking her head for the last time. "Thank you for changing our lives." The cow looked at him with those wise and kind eyes, as if to say every moment had been worth it. When she closed her eyes for the last time, the whole family cried. But they were tears of gratitude, not of sadness. Gratitude for everything that special cow had given them. They held a beautiful funeral for Faith, in the same pasture where she had been found. They planted a tree over her grave, a mango tree that grew strong and beautiful, bearing sweet fruit that fed the children of the estate. Julian, who was now 40 years old, began telling the story of Faith to his children and grandchildren, the story of how 2 orphaned children and an abandoned cow found each other and saved one another. "And the moral of the story," he would always say at the end, "is that family isn't something you get for free. It's something you build with love, patience, and care." Daisy, who was now 15, always asked the same question at the end of the story. "Dad, do you believe Grandma Faith knew you were going to find Great-Grandma Martha?" Julian would smile and look at the mango tree growing in the pasture. "I believe she had faith, and sometimes faith is all we need to start a new life." End of story. This was a fictional story created to touch our hearts. Now tell us what you thought. Do you believe Julian and Leo made the right decisions? Tell us your opinion in the comments. Thank you for your company. Don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other moving stories.